Good evening, everyone. I'm Archit Theshadri. Welcome to Gravitas, where we dig inside one of the big stories making headlines. Tonight, our focus is on U.S. President Donald Trump and his controversial rulings within just a month of taking office, including the upcoming court case on the Muslim travel ban. We'll have a panel of guests, including former CIA officer Glenn Carl in Boston, a cybersecurity expert and professor from Buffalo, New York, Arun Vishwanathan, and our U.S. Bureau Chief in Washington, D.C., Jols Gibson, to get us perspective on this big story. But first, some background on this story as Trump struggles to push his agenda. Now, in just a few hours, the U.S. Justice Department will go head-to-head in a federal appeals court on Tuesday over President Trump's temporary travel ban from 7 Muslim-majority countries. Now, many say this is his most controversial act since taking office last month. The move has caused chaos and confusion at airports across the United States and also sparked widespread protests. Just last week, a U.S. judge suspended the ban to allow people from those 7 affected countries to allow them to come back to the United States. Attorneys from Washington State and Minnesota will now battle it all out with the Justice Department. Lawyers in San Francisco on Tuesday will all decide on whether or not to restore the ban. Trump says the courts must act fast because of all the radical Islamic terrorism happening in Europe and West Asia. But the Justice Department has a different view. They say that Trump's order was just too broad. Opponents say the 90-day ban is illegal where citizens from Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen cannot enter the United States. A New America think tank says those who carried out deadly terror attacks on American soil since 9/11 were in fact legal U.S. citizens, and none of them came from these barred countries. So it also begs the question, why didn't Trump pick those countries like Saudi Arabia, or where some of these terror-related activities happened? And also brewing, more than 100 top U.S. tech firms have now gone to court to appeal against the immigration ban. They are unanimous that the ban will, of course, hurt the U.S. economy and that the United States could lose the services of skilled and talented workers. Here's more.
Pepsi, Zero Sugar, Super Bowl 51.
Lady Gaga's performance in Houston, Texas 2 days ago was a sellout show.
I wanna hold them like they do in Texas, please. Stay with me.
And in the era of Donald Trump, clearly loaded with social commentary. Just 2 days ago, the who's who of Silicon Valley had lined up to protest Trump's ban on Muslim immigration. And now, 122 IT companies have challenged the ban. Their petition argues, fairness, irregularity, and predictability are the core principles of immigration law and of US law generally. The industry warned that immigration order would hurt the US economy, it would make it difficult to attract overseas workers, it delivers the message that skilled workers come to the US at their risk.
Set up this manufacturing company. These are ironically aligned with Donald Trump's vision for Americans working. You know, I want to hire Americans, I want to manufacture American, export American, but I can't focus because of these things.
The Silicon Valley is made up of people from all over the world, of all different backgrounds, and a lot of these people are scientists, they're engineers, software developers, they're even rocket scientists. So these are also people who are immigrants, and these are the people that are not going to be allowed back into our country.
The ban has given the tech industry renewed voice and a rallying point on immigration. Industry leaders are hopeful that the Trump administration will realize the impact it would have on America's competitiveness and lift the ban. Bureau Report, WION.
Let's now head to the United States, where our panel of experts join us tonight on Gravitas. Thank you guys so much for joining us, Arvind Vishwanathan and Glenn Carr. Let me start with you first, Arvind, with regards to this. How much clout do firms in the United States have, as many of them, as we just saw, are uniting against Donald Trump, sort of saying that this is going to, of course, hurt them, hurt their businesses, and, of course, all the skilled laborers who come to the United States, those skilled workers on H-1B visas?
Well, Arshad, thanks for having me on your show. This is these companies have a tremendous impact. I mean, let's not forget, these companies, just the market capitalization of these companies are equivalent to the economies of nations. And these companies are founded, run, manned by immigrants as well as Americans, and they are job creators. All of these companies, employ thousands and millions of people all over the world. There's a tremendous amount of clout that these companies have, and they're going to bring it to bear because their bottom line is already getting hit. Let's not forget, Microsoft put out a statement about almost 100 employees that are directly impacted by this current ban itself. Google put out a notice about 80-odd employees of theirs who couldn't make it back to the United States or were troubled because of this ban. So they're already facing a direct impact, and this is not even yet at that H-1B level where other nations from which we get our skilled technology workers are going to be impacted. So there's a tremendous bottom line effect here, and they're going to fight back.
All right, Glenn, let me go now over to you with regards to all of what Trump is doing, struggling to push his agenda in the United States. Now, this is not the first time that Donald Trump has isolated himself from the rest of the community. Certainly that happened with members of his own Republican Party. And now it seems like it's the business community and, of course, the immigrants that he's trying to isolate. Why is this so?
Well, why is it so? That's a question we ask about most things that Trump seems to be saying or trying to do. But I think, actually, I agree with our colleague of a moment ago that the high-tech industry, Silicon Valley, will push back and have some success because the administration does listen to business. So we saw this dynamic with the Republican-controlled government 30 years ago under President Reagan during the last effort at immigration reform. There was going to be a bill passed, and then agribusiness said, well, if we make it illegal to hire illegal aliens, then we won't be able to conduct our business. And so there was an exemption made, and the immigration bill became, frankly, incoherent. You could expect, I think, a similar response with regard to high-tech engineers and scientists. There would be exceptions made for H-1B and for their entrance. However, the larger point, the larger objective, which is this cultural, ethnic push to define America as a white European nation, will continue. So there will be serious tensions and hostility to immigration continued by Trump, although I do anticipate exceptions for high tech.
All right, let me stay with you, Glenn, with regards to this. Donald Trump's certainly not been shy about many of his decisions, but, typically in a situation like this, he's been a businessman and now he's heading politics. How independent are some of the actions and things that he does? It seems like they're just sort of all the things he promised during the election trail. He's now fulfilling those promises. Does he really listen to his advisors at this point, or what are they doing, if anything, at this point? And is that playing a role with regards to some of these moves as he tries to push his agenda?
Well, he does seem to listen to people, yes, if his advisors or whoever is commenting couches the reactions and comments in a way that seems to praise Donald Trump himself and to agree with what he says. So you'll find that periodically Trump, under severe criticism and pressure, will simply redefine the issue and show that he is affirming his principles while changing his positions to some extent. So that we can anticipate. There are hints of that already with the immigration debate, where there are exceptions now being made at the same time he affirms he's actually not making any changes, but he is. So I think that will happen. But the underlying nationalistic, populist, and white European cultural framework that is all that Trump has as a worldview and policy basis will continue.
All right, Glenn, we'll come back to you and Arun in just a moment, but let's get some more background and perspective about what is going to be happening in the next few hours in the United States. Keep in mind, it is still early hours in the United States at this point. Many of them are just starting their day. But it seems that when President Trump doesn't get what he wants, he tends to try to find someone to play the blame game. This time, it's, of course, the U.S. Justice Department. After ruling by a judge who forced that his operation of the immigration ban be provoked. The president, of course, taken to Twitter, tweeting out at his will, talking about his displeasure when it comes to this opinion, the opinion of the so-called judge, he says, which essentially takes law enforcement away from our country, is ridiculous and will be overturned. Just cannot believe a judge would put our country in such peril. If something happens, blame him and the court system. People pouring in bad. Now, the tweets drew just quite a bit of protest and controversy, just as like many of Trump's recent moves have been doing so. His immigration move certainly being one of them. Others called it a disgrace as the president of the United States, that he really had no understanding of the principle of the balance of power and underlying the U.S. political structure. Now, even as Donald Trump pushes his idea of national security by banning travelers from the 7 Muslim-majority countries, many analysts have questioned whether such a ban will even be effective at all.
Thank you all for being here.
U.S. constitutional experts say Donald Trump's ban on Muslim immigration is legally in the clear, as it is intended to secure the country, but it suffers from serious deficiencies.
In general, as the executive action on immigration currently stands, it's mostly legal, temporarily against non-green card holders, non-immigrant visa people. Mostly bad policy because it's both over-inclusive and under-inclusive of the type of national security threats that it's justified with. And the rollout, the implementation has just been horrendous. The lack of guidance, the lack of input from Homeland Security and other interested agencies.
However, the fact that the ban targets Muslim countries and Muslim people is seen by some as a violation of the Constitution. David Gantz of the Civil Rights Division of the Constitutional Accountability Center said Trump has overstepped his authority.
When we first created the Constitution, one of the things we said was there would be no religious tests for office. And this goes even further and erects a religious test for entry. And that just goes beyond what the Constitution allows.
The overwhelming thought is that Trump is disregarding the Constitution, and that could be a dangerous sign.
At the end of the day, the Constitution is just a piece of paper. If the people don't trust it, or they think that our whole system of government isn't working, that's when you start getting into some dangerous territory.
The government says the president is exercising his constitutional authority to control borders, and the law allows him to suspend the entry of any class of foreigners who could possibly be a threat. But many people in America disagree with the manner of its implementation. Bureau Report, WION.
All right, now let's go back to Glenn Carl with regards to this. Glenn, quite a bit happening there in the United States. Give us a sense of what the mood is like there, since all of this went down just a few weeks ago. I mean, it's hard to believe that it's not even been a month since Trump took office, and yet, as many people suspected, there's quite a bit of chaos and confusion as we saw those confusion at the airports, the confusion in terms of immigration, and of course all the widespread protests all over the country. Give us a flavor of what it's like on the ground.
Gosh, well, the immigration issue is significant, but it's only one of an almost infinite number of issues that are actually larger. I and many others have said that we're, with the election of Trump, facing the largest crisis to our institutions, to our government since 1861, which is our Civil War, when the country split in half. So the immigration issue and its constitutionality is significant. And of course, the government can control the borders for reasons of national security. That's one of the measures of the sovereignty of a state. But the United States constitutionally may not do this based upon religious exclusion. So it would seem to be clearly unconstitutional. You can say that it's not done for, you can rationalize as you wish, as Trump is doing now, that it's not for religious reasons, and the court will decide if substantively that is the case or not. But the larger issue, to get to your question, is that we are in an unprecedented crisis of institutions and challenge to our separation of powers and our system of government. The government was in many ways paralyzed under Obama because of the opposition of the Republicans, and prior to that, this goes back 30 years and more to the Reagan Revolution and the rise of Newt Gingrich, and things are worse now. And Trump is not just an outlier, but someone who doesn't simply challenge, but dismisses many of the principles on which our institutions and functioning of society are based.
All right, Glenn, we'll have you stand by just a moment. Let's now go to Jols Gibson, our U.S. Bureau Chief, joining us from Washington, D.C. Jols, thanks again for joining us. You've been there for about a month now. What do we expect to happen in the coming hours in the United States as all of this, gets out to court? There's a battle between Trump and many of the lawyers. They're, trying to revoke this ban and certainly, sort of upholding American values. Many people say this is the American dream, a land full of immigrants, and now we see this ugly battle unfolding in court in the next few hours. What's set to happen?
That's right, Archer. So this case is expected to start in the Court of Appeals in San Francisco, on the other side of the country to where I am, at 6 p.m. Eastern time. That's the New York and Washington, D.C. time, which would be sort of the early hours of the morning on Wednesday in New Delhi. So as soon as that gets underway, then we should start to understand what potentially could be the ruling. But we don't know how long the actual case will be heard for, and therefore when we can expect a verdict. So sometime on Wednesday evening, perhaps, India time, we could have a sense of whether this ruling against Trump's executive order will be upheld, and therefore whether this case will continue to go through the U.S. legal process and perhaps up to the Supreme Court, which is what most people are expecting if the order against Trump's executive order is upheld.
And it seems like, Giles, that Trump's travel ban faces its next hurdle of sorts. Maybe talk to us about the legal aspect of all of this. How does this differ from when states in the United States, the 50 states, file legal actions against the ban, which what is about to happen now in San Francisco, as you mentioned, around 4:35 India time. So still another 8-9 hours away.
Yes, so this action by these 127 companies, sort of a who's who, really, of the U.S. tech industry, including Google and Twitter and other firms, Apple, for example. They're filing what's known in legal terms as a friend of the court brief. So they're actually sort of essentially tacking on their action onto existing legal action that's been filed by 2 U.S. states against Trump's executive order. And really the entire issue here is around First Amendment. Does this executive order violate the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which for our viewers in India especially, just to give them a bit of background on that, that's the amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which guarantees things like freedom of speech and, of course, freedom of religion. And what these tech firms are saying and what these 2 U.S. states are saying is that this executive order, because it's targeting Muslim-majority countries, violates that First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution.
All right, Giles, we'll have you stand by just for a moment. Let's now go back to Glenn with regards to you. The fact that so many companies are, standing behind and really pushing for this case to be revoked in the courts in the United States certainly shows a sign that, they're concerned. It's going to impact certainly their profitability, but also the workers there. How likely do we think that this will be revoked, or is it just too early to tell? That was from Mr. Glenn Carl. Talk to us about that question.
Well, I'm terribly sorry. I didn't hear my name. Too early to tell. I think the impacts are already being felt with regard to the willingness or the apprehensions that foreigners feel in considering whether to go to the United States or try to go, either as a tourist or more relevantly in this issue, as an immigrant. These things are felt immediately. I can't give concrete data on this specific crisis, but I know from prior issues, such as the measures taken after 9/11 and the Patriot Act, which increased measures of national security at the border, among other things, that the numbers of non-Americans coming to the United States as tourists and to work declined. And anecdotally and empirically, there are many people who were more apprehensive and chose not to come. So the impacts will be quick. I would like to give one concrete example on a related issue. A number of years ago, when I was still in the government, I was asked by, my agency was asked by Congress to look at the issue of protectionism and whether we were having our secrets stolen by Chinese students and whether we should stop that. And we found that of the 500,000 Chinese graduate students who had come to the United States from 1979 up until about 2006, it is true 100,000 of them went back and presumably were taking the things they were learning and then using it to compete against us. However, 400,000 of them sought to stay permanently in the United States. So when you do a cost-benefit analysis of what immigration does for the United States, it's quite clear that it benefits the United States. In a narrow sense, yes, others are taking information, but the overall benefit is so strong. I would anticipate on the merits that the suit of which these companies are friends of the court would be a strong one, but reason is a secondary issue in politics often.
Into all of this that is happening in the United States, is this something that is a pure business interest that Trump is doing for this? Is it about American values? Is it about combating terror? It seems like there's a lot out there, at stake. But again, when we look at that list, we see many of those countries that, there was nobody on that list since 9/11 that were from those 7 countries. Saudi Arabia noticeably missing. Many of the 9/11 hijackers from Saudi Arabia. We've known the U.S. and Pakistan's interesting relationship when the United States has talked about dealing with terrorism and combating global terror with Pakistan. But Saudi Arabia wasn't on the list. Pakistan wasn't on the list, but these 7 countries appear, and there's been some opponents say, well, that was Obama's list. So is this about American values, or is this about protecting his own business interests?
Well, tacking on a business interest is, I think, literally a secondary point here. This gets to cultural and ideological perceptions and convictions. I will accept that Trump believes, and many of his supporters believe, that the threat of, in fact, I know they believe, the threat of terrorism is grave, existential, and that our borders are porous and we're in grave danger. None of that is true, and it is empirically demonstrable that it is not true. But the facts are always secondary. Emotion counts in this. I have found, as many others find, we all find, that in a political debate, specifically with regard to Trump's supporters, that reason is largely irrelevant. There's a separate set of facts that are not facts, that are based upon conviction and emotion. And so I will grant the sincerity of the desire of Trump's supporters to protect the borders and protect us from a grave threat. And the facts that belie their perceptions don't hold sway. It's a very alarming, disturbing, dismaying circumstance.
All right, Glenn, we'll come back to you in just a moment to continue this discussion about Trump as he pushes his agenda while all of this unfolds in courts. But now let's go to our next angle of the story. Sarabhai, he is the former chairman of NASSCOM. Let's get your thoughts with regards to this and how badly the Indian IT sector has been hit by Trump's immigration H-1B visa ban.
Well, the Indian IT sector is a very mature sector today, and we are now talking of an industry that's over $160 billion, has some of the largest companies in the world. So the H-1B issue that's being talked about will, of course, create some stresses, but it is not something that the Indian IT sector cannot overcome. As it is, all of the major IT companies have been evolving their business models. They've been becoming more and more oriented towards leveraging technology, robotics, getting into IP products, many types of things. So their business models are changing. H-1Bs have a great benefit to our ability to service clients globally. But most of our companies also recruit a lot of people in our target markets. So I think the H-1B issue, firstly, they're right now just introducing some legislations. These are not acts that have been passed. The form in which they may finally get passed is likely to be very different than what is being discussed today. So my own view is that yes, it is challenging to have these kind of discussions, these kind of legislation being introduced, which are discriminatory in nature. But we should, as an industry, be able to ride through it with some level of comfort. So I am not overly worried about.
And Sarabhai, staying with you with regards to this, how is this going to impact India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, his whole push about a digital India? And this was certainly one on his agenda. Give us that perspective.
Well, thank you all for being here.
All right, so I'm not sure if we have that connection there, but again, let me see if we have Mr. Srivastava there. The question is again, how is this going to impact Prime Minister Modi's Digital India initiative, Sarabhai?
The impositions that are coming on the H-1B, at least those that have been proposed, are actually largely unfair because they are discriminatory. They apply largely to companies that are doing H-1B visas, where 50% of their employees are not American, which singles out largely Indian companies, and it's by way of adding another tax. It's what I may call a combination of a tax, a tariff, and a non-tariff barrier. I don't think there is sufficient understanding that the Indian IT industry is creating massive amount of jobs in the US. It's making major US industries and companies very competitive. And if the H-1B program was to be in some way made adverse, as is being discussed, it will probably have at least, if not a bigger negative impact on US companies and on the US economy that it will on the Indian industry and Indian economy. Even today, our industry pays billions of dollars of social security taxes in the US, which by law we cannot claim. So it is by way of another tax, and the Social Security Administration in the US hugely benefits from it, plus the jobs that we create in the US. I think our Prime Minister and Mr. Trump, when they do meet, I am sure our Prime Minister would want to communicate to Mr. Trump some of these concerns, some of these issues. It's not something that will cloud the bigger discussion, because these are bilateral discussions that will always go on. After all, the American companies that are seeking to get a foothold in India, Apple wants a special deal on manufacturing. You have large American companies such as Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Uber, who for HP, for whom India is one of their biggest markets. Clearly, President Trump would like India to remain a very large market for them. US defense industry, US financial services industry, all of them want a good deal in India. And clearly when countries talk to each other, they try and optimize the trade impact that each one of them have. So I am optimistic about this outcome. I know it's right now a big issue in the media and it is challenging. But I'm optimistic about where this will lead.
All right, now we're going to take a quick break here on Gravitas and continue the conversation to figure out how and if Donald Trump will be successful in pushing his agenda. We'll be right back.